Do you have a story that you want to share with the world? Do you think your voice needs to be heard? Well, I'm here to tell you that podcasting is the fastest way to share your story with the world. Hi, welcome to a new episode of Podcast Your Story. I'm your host, Dr. Julie Marty-Pearson, and I am so happy to have you here for a brand new interview that I have done with Melissa Reich of Your Bish Therapist podcast. I met Melissa through another podcast. The podcast is Drama Darling by Amy Phillips, who has been a longtime comedian, radio host, and podcaster who covers reality shows, specifically Bravo reality shows. If you don't know this about me, I love Bravo. I am all about Bravo and all of their reality shows. It is actually how I decompress. As someone with an education in psychology, I also love watching reality just for the psychology of what people will do on camera. But anyway, I love reality, and because of that, I followed and listened to Amy Phillips, and through that, I met Melissa, who has been many times a guest on her show and a co-host. Melissa then started her own show where she really breaks down reality and other types of television from the mental health perspective. She is herself a therapist and has worked in many areas of the mental health field, which you'll learn more about. But one day I reached out to Melissa, partly because she's a podcaster and in the mental health field, but also because that she herself is a cancer survivor. I really love the way she approaches her content and her episodes, but I also really love how open and honest she is about her own mental health, her own health journey, and the battles she has faced since she was a teenager dealing with cancer. Last year, I lost a fellow podcaster and friend, Rebecca Johnson, to cancer, and really struggled with how to deal with the grief, as well as to honor and remember Rebecca. So one of the things I did was I asked Melissa if she would be interviewed for my podcast and talk about her experience, but also help me to talk about the ways that we can support our friends and family when they're going through serious illness like cancer. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I don't know how I can help. And me asking, how can I help you, isn't really something they need to be worrying about. So this is a very honest and raw conversation that Melissa and I had, talking about her cancer journey, how she thinks people can help their own friends and family, as well as talking about her podcast journey and how podcasting has changed her life. I know you are going to enjoy this interview, and I cannot wait to hear what you have to say after. So please make sure to reach out to me on social media, on my YouTube channel, or via email, and let me know your thoughts after you listen. So now I welcome Melissa to the Podcast Your Story podcast, and I can't wait for you to hear the conversation. So excited for this interview. I think I'm fangirling a little bit here. I am so excited to welcome Melissa Reich. I hope I just spelled your name right. Okay. Welcome, Melissa Reich, to the podcast. Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored and I'm very excited to be here. So thank you.
Yes, I am super excited for this conversation for many reasons. But to get started, I want to explain to the listeners how I met you via social media and your podcast. So Melissa has a podcast called Your Bish Therapist. Anyone listening who is a Bravo fan will get the name without us explaining. So I would say, going back years, it started with Amy Phillips, who used to host reality checks on Andy Cohen's channel on Sirius XM, who then started her own podcast, Drama Darlings. And I believe it was on the podcast that you first started speaking with Amy about Bravo-related topics. Is that correct? Or were you on her radio show?
No, so that's absolutely correct. I was a caller into her radio show because she and I DM'd a lot. And she just said that she's like, you're interesting. I like your point of view. Call into the show. And so I would call in as she was getting ready to leave. And then when she went over to Drama Darling, she said, you know what? I'm starting this new show. I like what you got going on. So why don't you come on the show? And Your Bish Therapist was born.
I love that. That all is making sense to me now. I do remember there were points at which callers would call in, especially when we were talking about psychology-related things on her radio show. But specifically, so Amy's shows and podcasts are all about, going over reality shows, mostly Bravo, but all types. And so one of the things that always comes up whenever we talk about reality, of course, specifically, especially I would say housewives shows, is why do they act this way? What is the psychology behind their behavior? So that's kind of where you came in to kind of give your guidance. So what has that process kind of been like for you to start to use your background as a mental health therapist into the TV pop culture world?
It's funny because I was just talking about this with my own Bish therapist, who I call my listeners' grand Bish therapist. My therapist loves that I call her that. She's like, I am honored. I am so honored. But so there's a lot of skills that I didn't realize are transferable from being a therapist, a practitioner, to this pop culture space. However, what I was not prepared for is that, I was always the type of kid who grew up and was like, why are people treating me this way? Why do people behave this way? Why are adults so grumpy? Why? I have always loved the pop culture space. I was always one of those people who I loved, like the gritty pop culture stuff, like Rock of Love and Flava Flav and the Surreal Lives, all of that sort of stuff. And then when Housewives came about, I just was in love. Season 1, episode 1 of Roni, of OC, I was just, it started a love affair. So what's fascinating to me is I would do what I'm doing now, but in my own head. And I had no idea how much people would be interested in what I had to say.
Well, or that other people weren't having those thoughts too, right? I think working in education of psychology, our brains work a certain way because of what we know, right? But yeah, that I love that you didn't have any idea people would want to hear what you're thinking in your head.
No, because, again, I'm accustomed to believing that, people don't care about me or care what I have to say, thanks, trauma. So it just never occurred to me. And then when I started in this space, when Amy had me on her podcast, she said, I really think this is something. She's like, between, your clinical experience and your personal experience and just the way that you speak about things, she's like, I think that this is a niche that is like untapped. And here, let me be clear. There are other therapists who do this. I am honored that I have just had a lot of success, which, trust me, is shocking to me first and foremost. No one's more surprised than me.
What? I get that, right? I think especially because in like the psychology word, like our job is one-on-one or in small groups. Like it's more of an intimate thing that you don't think someone would like to hear that conversation to the masses, right? No one would want to hear what I have to say. But it's so funny how you explained your love of reality, because I know oftentimes when I tell people, oh, I love Bravo, I love all things Bravo, I love Housewives, I love all of that. And they look at me like, really? I'm like, well, it's an outlet for me. It's a way to kind of just turn everything else off, watch it, be like, this is crazy, or, oh my gosh, I love this. Right. And I think it's for me, it's always been kind of a way to turn off all the other noise and just kind of watch something for fun. But it still stimulates that psychologist in my head.
Which is you're right, which is always this brain of mine is just always thinking. So it was a lovely distraction. Fully agree with that. And to be fair, it also was like, I've had a lot of trauma, but my life's not so bad because, we tend to think that like money or fame would change that.
Right.
And it's like, no, it just makes things more complex. And so it was this like duality of it kept me mentally stimulated, but it also was like such validation that, maybe I'm doing all right here.
Right. Maybe my life isn't so bad after all.
Right.
Yeah, I've always said there's definitely an element, especially with housewife shows, that money doesn't cure all. Money doesn't make you happy. Money doesn't mean you're happy. There's this level of, oh, it's so opulent and all these amazing trips and parties and all of that, but that doesn't mean they're happy and have a good marriage and have good relationships, right? So I've always kind of felt that validation of, it's interesting. I mean, aspects of it, sure, who wouldn't love to fly private or whatever it may be, but that doesn't mean their life is easy. So I get what you're saying.
And, what's fascinating, too, is in my career, I have had the pleasure of working with a very diverse background of folks. And so what's interesting is I've worked with folks in lower socioeconomic status, but I've also worked with folks in very high socioeconomic status. And the problems are similar, but they present very differently. And so having that experience with people maybe who are wealthy or in higher socioeconomic brackets, working with that, it kind of does give me this little insight into some of these, rich women and some of the issues they may present with and how different that is from someone who, is in a different socioeconomic bracket, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. I just was thinking a friend of mine who's a clinical social worker, whenever I talk to her about her patient, she says, well, it doesn't matter. We all have the same complaints. Our spouses, our jobs, our bosses, family drama. We all have the same things. It just looks different depending on who you are, where you live. Like you said, your socioeconomic status. And I think what I've always found interesting with housewives is when we start to learn about their childhood, because a lot of them were not born into money or high class living. And so we can kind of sometimes go, oh, that's why you're reacting that way.
Right.
Picking them apart, but it makes sense to us.
That's exactly right. And then you can tell some of them who did grow up with money, there is still drama. It's just more subversive. Like rich people have problems, but they're just very like, let's not talk about them. Let's just pretend they don't exist. We can use our money and our status to kind of as a shield and as armor and all of that. And so, that's been interesting too.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what I think we're living that in a lot of areas of the world of how rich people use that to gain power. But that's a whole nother podcast interview.
Ding, ding. Yes. But ding. Yes.
So that's kind of, we've talked about like how your world collided with reality and then created your podcast. But before all of that, and obviously still now, you are a licensed therapist. So what can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you help, what type of work you've done to give them a sense of like kind of who you are as a person helping others in the mental health space?
Yeah, good question. So I did something actually a little untraditional, is that when I went to college, I went to Penn State University in Pennsylvania, and I did my undergrad in psychology, but I wanted to give myself some actual experience before I went to grad school, which no judgment ever. There's really two options. You either go right to grad school, right, which you're familiar with, or you work in the field and then go. And so I knew, because I'm very type A, I wasn't worried that if I took a break, I wouldn't go back, because I am psychotically focused, which is part of my problem. But so my first job, I actually worked at a place called, I don't know if I should say the name of it now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, so I'm not going to say the name, but it was a very intensive scenario where it was a unit of girls from ages 12 to 18. It was like a residential treatment facility. And so my first job was really dipping my toe in the pool of, does this make sense for me? Because I'm also painfully practical. And I was like, I don't want to go right for school if like this isn't really what I want to do. So that first job, what it taught me is that my relationship building skills with people, aside from the clinical interventions and the clinical knowledge, for me, that is my strength, is connecting with people, seeing them, making them feel seen. I just have that way about me. And I didn't really know that until I worked at my first job. And so from there, I have worked in inpatient residential treatment facilities for drug and alcohol. So for a lot of my career, I focused on drugs and alcohol. And I did individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, couples therapy. I've kind of done it all. I've worked with people in Northeast Philly, and then I've also worked in other locales. So I really have seen a gamut, but my focus has always been really on adults, individuals with anxiety, depression, trauma. That's kind of my sweet spot, as I like to say, just of my therapy style is not for kids. It's really for adults. And so my first job, I did work with kids, and I really had a hard time with it because my style is so adult. And if I'm being frank, I'll be honest and share that, I hadn't processed my trauma when I started working in the field. And so my inner child stuff was still so painful. And so I think that also, if I'm being candid, really presented a hurdle with kids, because I was so out of touch with my stuff, which, it's interesting as I've gone about my clinical career, my own stuff has really made or broken my experiences. And so what I will say is that I haven't practiced since the pandemic due to health issues that I've had. And I was searching for, am I going to go back to work, with my health stuff? What do I do? And therapy to me is truly so sacred. It is, I'm trying to think of the word that I want to use. I just take it so seriously, and it's so sacred to me that I was like, well, I can't practice if my body is unpredictable. If I'm waking up one day and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this, that's irresponsible to treat. And so I just went into this like deep depression, and I'm like, what even is my purpose? And then boom, this falls into my lap. And so it's very different, but I do get a lot of messages about, wow, you really helped me to see this. I had someone tell me the other day that, listening to my podcast helped them extricate themselves from an unhealthy relationship. And, so this is a very long-winded way to say is that I just love helping people, and I love making people feel seen and feel understood. And so now I just get to do that on a greater level, which also comes with pros and cons, right? Because in therapy, it's just one person projecting their stuff onto me, right? Just one. But now on the internet, it's 14,000. And
they all have an opinion about it.
Oh, not only do they have an opinion about it, they have an opinion about me, honey. And they're like, I am not accustomed to having people really dislike me. It's never something that I've really been used to. I've, always maintained friendships and done well socially. And now all of a sudden in this space, people really dislike me. And so that's just the internet. But that is the one piece that I will say I was not prepared for, is just the mass projection onto me and people taking all of their stuff about bad therapists or someone who's hurt them, and they're putting it onto me. So it's been a journey. Yeah.
That totally makes sense to me, because in therapy, you're getting one person possibly projecting on you, and you know why, or that's happening, and it's much more of a controllable process. But I can imagine 500 or 1,000 people commenting on an episode or a reel or whatever. You're like, okay, that's a lot. I can't take all of that on.
So much. It's so much. It's great because I have a wonderful community of folks that they are just so engaged and they will share their thoughts. And I will get hundreds of comments. And there's some days where it's like, I can't manage this, but I love it. I love that, it's a place for people like us to go to, I call it like ethical reality TV. I take something that may not be ethical or great, and I use it to, talk about these important concepts. I kind of joke it's like tricking kids into eating their vegetables.
No, it's so true. You're using it as a vehicle to educate and let people know, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay that you've had this issue. You're not alone. I say that all the time to women I work with who want to start a podcast. I'm like, the purpose is you may not know. You may not know who you're going to reach. And I always say, you never know who might hear this episode and be impacted, and it may have nothing to do with what you were talking about. And so there's a power in that. And I also find that podcast is such a great tool for building community. Like you said, you have this great community. And I think that's really powerful for everyone, but especially us as women, to connect with people that we wouldn't have ever connected with without it. It has such a huge reach. I'm always shocked when I see countries that are listening to one of my podcasts. I'm like, okay, right?
Same. One episode, I just went through all the locations where people are listening. And I'm like, how are there people listening to me in North Korea?
Right.
I am gobsmacked, but thank you. Thank you so much.
So my first podcast, the story of my pet, I'm always shocked when I see Ireland, you're on the top chart, Norway. I'm like, okay. Even countries that English isn't their first language, you're like, that's very interesting. You just never know. And that does segue into something else we will talk about in a few minutes. But I do want to say so much of what you have said in your history of your education and working is like ding, ding, ding for me. Originally I went through undergrad and a master's in psychology straight into a doctoral program in clinical psych. And it was that first year of, starting to do practice therapy and all of that I realized I can't do this. I can't take on everybody else's stuff. I just realized because, whatever you call it, empath, whatever. I've always been an introvert, but I've always been great at helping people through difficult times and understanding what they're trying to say and all of those things. And like you, I didn't realize it was a skill until one of my professors said, you're really great at this. You should come do research with us and do focus groups and interviews. So I thought, oh, well, that must mean I should be a therapist. But psychology is so broad in some ways. There's so many ways we can use that education. So you're making me feel seen. I'm like, I get it. You think you should do things because that's what you're good at, but it still may not be the right place for you. And
I think that me doing this, right, it shows how we can do what we do in so many different ways. There's not just one right way or even two, it's like, and the ability to shift, as adult, that fear, that uncertainty. I think when you experience that, I think that's why we relate so much, because doing this and going outside of our comfort zone, it's very uncomfortable, but it's some of the greatest stuff I think I can speak for me I've ever done.
Right. Absolutely. Me too. I've made some of the best connections and friendships and met some of the most amazing women, especially that I'm like, I would have never met you. And for me, as a 47-year-old woman without any human kids, only fur kids, I always felt very alone in that because most of my friends and family have kids and have that journey. And through podcasting, somehow I've met so many who are very much like me that it's like, wow, okay, I'm not alone in a way that I always kind of felt on the outs. And that is the power of podcasting, I think.
And I think for me, and I know we'll talk about this, but losing my ability to have children via ovarian cancer when I was young, it does validate so many women who, by the way, whether you want children or not, it's like childless women are seen as, well, we know how we're seen. Right?
Less
society.
than, no value, all the buzzwords.
Right. And so what I find really special and important is changing that narrative, because look at the work that we're doing, right? And so I think needs to be the societal shift away from women are valuable in many other roles other than mother. maybe some in addition to or other than or what have you. But that's for me. I'm just a huge advocate. I'm very outspoken, and I am just a champion for women in that way. And I just couldn't be prouder to do that.
Absolutely. Well, I am a very proud auntie. I have many, both blood and non-blood nieces and nephews, as well as fur babies that I am auntie to. And I take that role very seriously, and I love it very much. And I know for me personally, not having kids was more of a choice, although many doctors said, we're not telling you not to, but we're not sure how your body will respond. I have autoimmune issues since I was young. But when I did have a hysterectomy, I didn't anticipate the emotional and psychological feelings I had, because it was like, I'm not going to have kids. This isn't a big deal. I need to do this for my body. But then I was in my room on the wing where all the babies had just been born, hearing all the babies cry overnight as I had just had my uterus removed. And I did not expect that. I didn't even think about where I would be that night, let alone what that experience would be like. So I think that's important, because I know now there are other women who have felt that and have also felt alone and not understanding how to feel like that. And as women, no matter how we lose it, whether we've had kids or not, losing that ability to have children impacts you no matter what you think it will. I have learned that. And so I think, like you said, podcasting has given me a way to connect with people and women in a way I never would have been able to. And 5 years ago, if you told me I had a podcast, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
Same. I joke all the time that I am tech elderly, and it is not so much a joke and more a truth. If someone would have told me that I would have this complicated setup, that I would be doing this, I would have said that you were on mushrooms or some sort of psychedelic, and I'm so sorry that I can't help you. But you're right. I mean, I talk to people every day for the past year that before I even started doing this, I didn't even have them in my life. And now there's so many people like you and other folks that I talk to on a day-to-day basis that a year and a half ago, they weren't even on my radar. So it's just, it's wild, it's cool, it's stressful, it's beautiful, it's all the things.
All the things, and sometimes all the things in one day, right?
Sometimes, yes, that's correct. Yes, you got it.
But I do think that COVID shifted that for a lot of us. Like it, for one, kind of stopped the world, and we weren't doing what we'd always been. And then it also made us really realize how fragile life is and how quickly life can change. And I think I've met so many women that made shifts in some way since then, because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. They wanted to feel proud about their work or their side hustle or whatever it may be. And it's very stressful to go out and try something completely new. And, but for me, meeting people like you and so many others, it's like, this is why I'm here. I'm connecting with women who I need for the rest of my life, because, we're all going through something and we need that support so much so. So
that's right.
Yeah,
I think right. And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think that for me, having community is so special and important, because not all of us were privileged to be born into a community that we should have been born into. And so, like you said, it's not just about blood. It's about those relationships that we make for ourselves in adulthood that support us, that lift us up, that, maybe we didn't have the opportunity to have growing up. And so for me, that's the greatest thing. And I'm just really resonating with that part of what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. So speaking of someone I met through podcasting, one of the reasons I reached out to Melissa to ask her to be on the podcast was a couple of months ago, a friend of mine, Rebecca Johnson, passed away from cancer. And even though we knew ultimately 5 days before she passed that there were no more treatment options, she was going on hospice, like we were all processing that, no one expected it to happen so quickly. And so we were all kind of just stuck in this shock, this like, what do we do? And if you want to learn more about Rebecca, you can listen to her interview on this podcast. I'm very grateful that I got to have that space with her before she left because it means a lot to me and so many others now. But one of the reasons I reached out to Melissa, to you specifically, is because you are very open and honest about your own journey with cancer and having survived twice. So I kind of said to you, I'm not trying to put my grief on you, but I need some help understanding how to process this. Ultimately, there's two things I have felt since then is one, how do you process a sudden loss of someone who was so bright and full of life? And the other side is for women, for anyone who has someone in their family or friend that's going through cancer, how do we support them best? Because, there's that, I don't want to bother you, but I want to be here for you, but I don't want to push myself on you, all of that. So those two reasons were the reasons I messaged you and said, Melissa, would you come and talk to me about these things? So share as much or as little as you want about your own cancer journey to kind of give a sense of why I reached out to you for that.
And first of all, I am honored to be here to kind of memorialize Rebecca and also to give her pain meaning and power, because that's all I can do for myself. And that's all I can do for my fellow, survivors and thrivers and people that we've lost too soon. So when I was 17, I was diagnosed with end-stage ovarian cancer. This was in 1998, and it was stage 3C ovarian cancer. It was misdiagnosed for a long time because I was medically neglected by my family and by doctors because I was living in an area that is terrible. I was born and raised in Chicago, but we moved to a very small town in Pennsylvania, and that is when I got sick, which is like, if I was in Illinois, I really think I would have fared much better, which is and that's right. So everything I'm explaining here is like grief is so complex. And grief, it's not just like we don't have grief buckets. When you have grief in one area, it triggers grief in another area and another area. And then it becomes like a game of dominoes. And before you know it, it's like you're just drowning in grief. And
I have to say one thing I've always said about grief to people is you can't compare grief. You can't compare grief of losing a person versus losing a job or a marriage or a home to an awful disaster, to losing parts of you for medical reasons, which I have gone through myself, that it's all grief. And like you said, it all goes to the same space and then it just piles up when you're not dealing with it.
Yep. And it has a way of really just smacking you right in the face if you're not paying attention. So, so by the time my cancer was diagnosed, it was so far gone that in 1998, recovering from this stage of ovarian cancer, they were like, we're sorry. They suggested that my parents make accommodations and, basically plan my funeral. And my parents, it took me to a hospital that they wouldn't even agree to treat me. They were like, we can only offer you like hospice. And my parents, fortunately, were like, nah, we're gonna look at something else. And so they took me to Penn Medicine, who, after I had, I think it was like 9 or 10 months of chemotherapy, I had 3 hysterectomies, which how? 3. So the first one I had was when I was 17. They wanted to try to preserve my reproductive organs because I was so young, again, in case I did want to have children, which I did always want to have children. And then, so the first hysterectomy was just one ovary, and they found that I had 2 liters of fluid and thousands of invasive tumors from my diaphragm all the way to my pubic bone, in addition to 2 tumors the size of softballs. So the first surgery was to debulk that. Then I did chemotherapy, and then I had another surgery, and they said, unfortunately, we can't save the ovaries. And so they left in my uterus and my cervix. And so the ultimate insult to injury was after I recovered from all of this, I was put on, because I have a uterus and a cervix, it's very complex. You need to do hormone replacement. And so to add insult to injury, I had all of that happen, and I still proceeded to get a period for the next years of
Yeah, that's not right. I can say that personally because that was the purpose for me to get my uterus removed was for no more periods because it was awful. But come on, you're going to go through all that and still have that?
Oh, so I have all of these scars. My abdomen looks like I was like attacked by a cheetah. And I've had 2 hysterectomies at this point, chemotherapy, and I still was having periods and it was crazy. And again, all of this was in the effort, but P.S., none of this was made by me. None of these decisions were made by me. These were made by my parents and doctors whose society was like, well, we still want to maintain her ability to have kids, but no one thought about what my quality of life might have been, right?
Your recovery
So-
each time. And I can't even imagine how you felt before that with all of that in your body, not knowing it. And then to have piece by piece taken out, like just do it all and get it over with, I
Yes.
can imagine that
Thank you.
feeling.
I wish I would have had you as my doctor, but no. So, although I have to say the people at Penn were great. And so miraculously, my doctors say to this day, I am in a medical journal that they are like shocked that I was not only able to get into remission, I sustained it for that cancer. And so what happened is I recovered in time to go to college. I hadn't applied to colleges because I thought I was dying. And so you don't apply to college when you think you're dying. So I applied to college. I was so traumatized, but just had no idea how bad it was.
Right.
And I just went off to college. I found psychology. I just fell in love, and it became my distraction technique from the anxiety that I was feeling from PTSD that was undiagnosed. Now, so I was able to have my career and work and all these things. And then when I was 35, I was diagnosed with my second cancer, which I am currently dealing with, which is called chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia is a chronic cancer that there's no cure, but there's treatment. So I've been doing immunotherapy for the past 5 years. I have to continue that for now. And it's basically the kind of forever cancer until there is some sort of a cure for it, which my doctors are hopeful in my lifetime there will be. But with chronic cancer, it's like even my experiences with cancer are so vastly different. One was like acute, it's going to kill you right now, immediately press the fire alarm. And this cancer, it was like slow growing. And it was like I was in a watch and wait period, which is basically just waiting for things to get bad enough that necessitated treatment. But because the treatment that I'm on right now, it did not exist when I was first diagnosed. That is how the light speed of blood cancer research is truly amazing. And I don't think that I would even be here talking to you today if it weren't for some of those advances. Because my CLL, because of my history of cancer and because of that chemotherapy, I've become a medical unicorn.
Which is not something you want to be, people.
No, it's awful because it's like I have 27 specialists. None of them want to work together. The medical system is a nightmare. And so what's frustrating now is that it's dealing with the grief and the loss and all that comes with my body just basically decompensating over the past, 10 years. But it's also the emotional stuff that comes with that, number one. And number two, it's constantly managing anxiety of it's just try to think about the fact that you want to die with this, not from it. And it's like, oh, no problem. I guess I just won't wake up every day and think about that obsessively. No problem.
I think that, medicine in general, medical practitioners, but also us as people don't realize the emotional, psychological toll of chronic, everyday medical issues. And although I've never had cancer and I cannot speak to your journey at all in that way, having had autoimmune issues since I was in 6th grade and having doctors tell my parents she's just faking it for attention, there's nothing wrong with her, and the psychology of not getting to go to school for almost a year, all of those things at the time impacted me and still do because of it shapes us. And you waking up
Of
every
course.
day with the knowledge of you have this and have to live with it, on top of the fact that you don't know what every day is going to look like. Some days are great. You have
Literally.
energy. The next day you're like, I can't get out of bed today. And people
That's
don't
exactly
get
right.
it, especially when it's not visible. They don't, oh, you're fine. Well, I look fine, but I feel like I need to sleep for 13 hours, right?
Exactly. And you know what's funny is that I have never looked better. I will acknowledge that I have never looked better. And it is such gaslighting of my own body. It makes me so mad that I'm like, because my skin is great, I look
Right.
youthful. And so, yes, to your point, the psychology behind the invisibility of our illnesses is so frustrating. And I do get constantly gaslit because people are like, well, you look great, so it can't be that bad. And to be fair, you know, you said something that I want to be clear. It's like when your body betrays you and you are stuck in a medical system that is, you know, patriarchal and gaslighting you. I was told twice that I was a hypochondriac, twice. And twice it was cancer, twice. Oh my God, I can't. But the point is, it's like it creates this emotional, psychological toll. That is what my podcast, that is what I speak to, because whether it's cancer or autoimmune issues or being gaslit by, you know, a patriarchal society, whatever it is, we know what that's like. And
Right.
so do so many other people, especially
Right.
women,
Right.
because there is a higher incidence of autoimmune issues in women, which I believe
Right.
is related to patriarchy and our emotional selves and being told, oh, well, you're just some crazy broad. So
Yeah.
just, you know, deal with that, whatever, right? It all plays a role. So because I have experienced personally, because I understand it professionally, it's just my greatest joy to let people know this is how it is. It sucks. You're not alone. And, you know, yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, and there's so, like you said, there's so many elements to it. I have friends who've had to battle their insurance just to get a diagnosis for something, or, you know, there's just so many layers to health and wellness
Oh,
and
yes.
dealing with any type of chronic issue, both physical and mental health wise. And there's also this feeling of I'm not supposed to talk about it because then I'm a complainer and I'm, you know, all these negative things that we're told. And that's why even talking about menopause and perimenopause was so taboo for so long. Oh, everybody deals with that. Just keep it to yourself. We don't want to hear about it. And it's like, no, you're gonna hear about it because I'm not crazy. I am dealing with a lot of hormones that I don't know how to handle. I know for me, even just after my hysterectomy, I would cry for no reason. And that was something I never did. I was never a crier or an overly emotional person. I'd be like, what's wrong with me? But it's like, why don't you prepare me for the things that could be changing? Because
And that is why I'm here to do what I do. Because women, I literally woke up in the hospital and they were like, we've removed your parts. They threw a pack of birth control at me and they were like, you know, good luck. And it's like women's issues are underfunded, are under researched, are under prioritized. Yet this is an experience that every woman on the planet since the beginning of time has dealt with. And there are absolutely psychological implications of hormonal disruption due to menopause, perimenopause, autoimmune issues, whatever it is. There absolutely is an emotional, physical, like highway. It's like the gut axis highway. That's what they call it. And there are connections here that I am happy to shout from the rooftops. You're not crazy. I'm not crazy. We're not crazy. Society, just because they don't want to listen to us crazy, irrational women, doesn't mean that we don't feel or experience something. And that's, and you know, so I think that's what's really important to, you know, use our platform for, right?
Right. Because what I've learned is it's not just the medical system itself, it's the physicians. I've had on at least 2 occasions that just popped in my head, women physicians say things to me that scarred me emotionally. Say things like, oh, well, your breasts aren't as developed as they should be. You've been on birth control for so long. And I'm just like, what? Like, you don't just make comments like that and think that's okay. And so it's systemic, as we both know, both
For sure.
mental health wise, physical health wise, women's health wise. But there are ways that we can support each other. So I could say to you now, in your world of managing a chronic illness, what are ways for you? Like if someone has someone like you in their life and they want to be supportive, they want to be helpful, what would you say to them would be like, this is the kind of thing I would like or not like?
So for me, I am so assertive and outspoken that it is impossible for you to not know what I need, just because that's who I am. I am an Aries through and through. I am a Ram, and I think that's how I've survived, just like pushing my head down, just like keep going, right? But if you know someone in your life isn't as vocal, and even people who are vocal, by the way, we still have needs. And, I don't always express those because we don't want to feel like a burden. And so my message to people is that if you are approaching someone with love and understanding, there's nothing that you can do wrong. Like you, Julie, there's nothing you could say to me that's wrong or hurts my feelings because you're coming from a place of understanding and wanting to be helpful. So that number one is that so many people are afraid to upset their loved one, but if you really have that relationship, just know that's really not possible. Number two, I think the biggest thing as a therapist and as a patient, what I'll say is it's important to ask someone, are you venting or are you looking for solutions? Because one big thing I notice with chronic health issues, my husband is very guilty of this and he's working on it too, is that when we love someone and we want to help them, we can become overbearing and just want to fix it. And guess what? Can't do that, And so I think as a friend, as a loved one, as a family member, it can even be acknowledging your feeling of helplessness or powerlessness.
Right.
And to say to your loved one, I feel helpless and powerless. This sucks. Acknowledging that can just be very helpful. And then I think the last one for me is showing up in ways that the person well enough to know that they might appreciate this. Right. I will constantly tell people, I got this, I'm fine. And I am, and I do. But that doesn't mean it's still not good for me to get that support. So if someone is kind of like that, maybe just, it's not sending a text or, I know people are allergic to phone calls these days, which, okay, that's fine. I'm a talker. I love a phone call, but I get it. So whether it's just like something, a note to let you know I'm thinking about you. I have this friend, Kim, she sends me cards, like greeting cards. But that's special to me because I love a greeting card and I save them. And, but again, I'm an elder millennial. So, I am elderly.
I get that. My mom still sends me cards, even though she lives 20 minutes from me. And I'll see her in person. She'll send me an extra birthday card in the mail. And, so I get what you're saying. There are ways that, for me, I love giving people gifts. I've been told gift giving is my superpower. I'm really great at giving people like the perfect gift. It's really hard for people to give me a good gift without me telling them exactly what I want.
Oh, challenge accepted. As someone who's a good gift giver like you, challenge accepted, Julie.
My husband has learned to stay on script.
Yeah.
Because I am so specific with gifts I give. It's like I have a hard time when people give me something and I'm like, well, what do I do with this? And that's awful. And it's something I work on. I'm grateful for everything. But I love that you saying that you know the person well enough to know what would help them, what would make them happy. Right. And I think I had a hard time that with Rebecca in the last few months. I knew she was going through all this treatment and having all these side effects. I felt like I always wanted to message her or text her, I don't want to bother you, but are you okay? And then so that also can maybe not feel great on her side hearing that. So it is a process of learning what's right for that person that you're trying to support.
And ultimately, leading with love, though, you can't go wrong.
Right.
You can't, and to your point, something else you can do if you don't want to text, like, are you okay? Because they're not. You can just send a love you, thinking about you. You're on my mind. Yes. I saw this funny thing and I thought of you, or I saw this dumb thing and I thought of you, or I saw this sweet, whatever it is. Right. That's okay. That's okay, too. Yeah.
And I think the same can be said for grief. I know for me, having different types of grief in my life, for example, 6 years ago, my dad passed away. He was 94 and a half. So when people would ask me, well, how old was he? And I would say that, oh, well, it's fine. Okay. It's like, okay, he died. Well, yes, he had a very long life, but it's still not happy. It's still not, yay, he's gone. Like, people don't realize comments, how they reverberate. And that's a good example I love to share, because it's like, you just don't say that to someone.
And correct. My grandfather is 97 and he's still alive. And he's like my best friend. The only reason I'm normal, I'm not joking. And I was talking about this with a friend, that it's like, I will never be ready to live in this world without him. So my grief is palpable, but it's like, yeah, he's 97 and that's how it goes. So two things can be true, right? Someone can like, okay, yeah, you die of old age, but it doesn't make it any less sad. I think my one bit of advice, if the words at least are about to come out of your mouth, just take that, pack that up and go somewhere else with at least ... At least
you had a good life.
At least you didn't have children, and so now you can focus on at least right. The at least stuff, when someone's trying to make you feel better, that's usually misguided. Right. And that comes off as very patronizing. So that's the one thing I can say to stay away from, is the at least.
Right.
The toxic positivity. Right. You know,
and one thing I will always say to people in instances like that, it's like, yeah, but for me, I only got him for 40 years of my life. It's never going to be it. So whoever it is and however you lose someone, it's okay to say, yes, but like you said with your grandpa, it was never going to be enough, right? And we lose people for different reasons, and I think people have a harder time when it's someone younger than older. They like, oh, that's okay. They were old anyway. But grief is grief. But I will say, I think for me personally, dealing with the grief of losing Rebecca as a friend, even though I'd only known her a few years, there were these two pieces of, one, why am I so impacted when, I haven't known her my whole life. I even say it to myself. It's not this, it's not that. It's like, but that doesn't matter. And then the other side of it is what I was trying to think, I haven't really had this happen before. It's someone my age dying. And we were like within a year of the same age. And so I think that was part of what an amazing person she was, how much I loved her and was so grateful to be a small part of her life. And her being my age was like, oh, this is a lot more complex than I expected it to be. And so I think
1,000%
grief can sneak up on us in ways that we aren't prepared for.
Because to your point, what someone like Rebecca does is it makes us realize our own mortality. And that is very, existentialists, Stoics, since the beginning of time have talked about memento mori, which is remember we will all die. And memento mori is really meant to be a philosophy of sometimes, I am more acutely aware of my mortality because of my stuff, but Rebecca made you aware of yours. And just as humans, existentially, that's extremely scary. It's unsettling because we like to think we're young, and I'm going to be 44. I'm not young anymore. And, so that's one part of it. But the other thing, Julie, I want to make sure to tell you and your listeners is that I like to say grief is the excruciating cost of love. And so it doesn't matter how long you've known someone. It doesn't matter, like when you connect with someone and you watch them decompensate and pass away, there is just such awful grief and sadness to that, period. No matter what she died from or what happened. And then, you add cancer to that and all these other things. I think also what I want to say is you might have a little bit of survivor's guilt. So I've lost people before with CLL. In my community, I've lost people and it's been very hard and unsettling. People I've never met, but it's just like, wow, this is very real. And I think that all we can do is validate and acknowledge that this is okay and not gaslight ourselves, because society loves to gaslight and say, oh, well, your grief makes me uncomfortable. So I'm going to tell you, well, okay, she's in a better place. Can I curse?
Yes, go ahead.
Fuck that. Okay. fuck that.
Or that was 2 months ago. Like, aren't you over it already? Like that kind of comment
for
to
the
be.
love.
Yeah.
For
It's
the
like,
love.
well,
Yeah.
maybe it took me 2 months to feel it. I don't know.
Well, that's the other thing, is that grief is sneaky. And like you said, what I believe happens as we get older, grief piles upon grief.
Right.
And so as we start to lose people, right? People our age pass, people younger, people older, family members, whatever, it like builds on itself. And it becomes harder and harder every time. And I think that's what people don't understand, is grief is not linear. It's cyclical. It's circular. It's, very complex.
Combinations of everything. And what I've also learned is that new grief brings up old grief.
Exactly.
I think I've been more sensitive about things. Like I said, my dad passed away 6 years ago, but having kind of felt a lot more of it the last few months, Veterans Day was very hard for me. And I'm like, how many Veterans Day has there already been? Why is me seeing a veterans post hard? My dad was a World War II veteran, and I would get emotional just reading some of the people's posts. And like, why? Because like you said, it's not linear. You never know when it's going to hit you. And there's going to be little things that trigger it that you are not going to expect. But then there's also little things that's going to put a smile on your face. For me, seeing a seagull is my dad. And when I see one or a picture, or I see it in something I'm looking at, it puts a smile on my face, because the beach was his favorite place. He loved to sit and watch the seagulls. And that has been something, a solo seagull has shown up for me many, many times since he passed. And that's something I can hold on in a positive way. And so I think what with Rebecca's passing is, what is that thing I'm going to hold on to be happy? Because she was someone who was, a lot of us have said it in different ways, like a ray of sunshine, a light in a dark room. She just had this amazing personality. She never held back from it. She had a great Southern accent. You love to hear her tell stories. She had an amazing humor about everything, including her cancer. She was also someone, her podcast is Love Is Not Dead, Just My Husband.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And she would say that and get very different reactions from different people. So she started a podcast to help process her own grief from a sudden loss of her husband, and to help others. But she approached it in such a way that was like not making it so sad and awful and negative. And so she did the same thing with her cancer. I mean, she was diagnosed with cancer 6 weeks after her husband died. She is someone who has been through trauma. And so I think for a lot of us, a lot of us have said, it was like, she went through so much. Why didn't she get to be the one to beat it? We all thought in the back of our head, she'll do it. It's been 5 years. Yes, it came back, but she always does it. But, we never know. And so I think...
And that's survivor's guilt, right? Is you don't have to have cancer to experience the guilt of why she was giving us such, she had such a great way about her, and she was using her experience, strength, and hope to help people. Why her, right? And that is the tough part. But to circle back to your original question, I think, Julia, the one thing I can tell you and other people as the absolute best way to help yourself with grief is to not gaslight yourself, and to stop asking, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel so sad? Why am I crying? Because that's very shame-based, and it's very judgmental of ourselves, which, listen, I'm guilty of that. But when you have a feeling, maybe just appreciate yourself and say, you know what, Melissa, thank you for noting that feeling that is so awful in my brain right now. And I'm just gonna learn to take that in, and I'm just gonna learn to feel that. Because at the end of the day, a lot of what we try to do is distract ourselves from feeling grief. And the only way out is through.
Yes. And I know that about myself. I am an introvert my whole life. I push it down, just keep it inside. Don't need to bring that out. Don't let that out. I had an ulcer at 5 because my sister was in a bad bicycle accident, was in the hospital for several weeks, and I couldn't see her, and I didn't understand it. And so I know that's what I do. Yes.
Yeah.
So I know it's easier said than done, but I have had to learn, and I still have to push myself. don't be afraid of this feeling that's coming on. Just let it happen. Because I know a lot of my health issues are because I don't let it happen and I push it down and ignore it and just keep pushing, keep going.
Right.
I'm a Virgo. I'm a type A. I do all the things. But no, because ultimately that has led me to kidney disease and other issues that I'm like, well, I guess I should face this now.
What we do not allow ourselves to feel will get expressed in our body.
Exactly.
1,000%. And to your point, we have to remind ourselves that feelings aren't final and they are not fatal.
Right.
They constantly change. They're not going to kill you. And you've made it through 100% so far of those times. And so we got a good track record, you know?
But I do think, I know we're over our time together, but kind of to bring it all to perspective, I think there's probably a lot of people, a lot of women listening who have lost things, whether it's parts of themselves, from physical health to marriages to, whatever, family members to friends, that we have to not feel bad about feeling bad about it.
Right.
And that the best way to honor them is to remember them and remember the positive. And that is what so many of us have done with Rebecca. We all did little clips, and our friend Tiffany, who was her podcast mentor, published a final episode of her podcast where Tiffany talked about their connection. She had several ones of us do little blips about what she had meant to us. And we feel like, and Tiffany is also set up for her podcast to remain in perpetuity. So it will always be available. And that's may seem like an easy or a little thing, but it's huge because it's like, we've done this for her. We can point people to her podcast and say, this might help you with your grief. I listened to her podcast because she was my friend. I was not a widow, nor had ever had cancer, but I have told her how her podcast helped me deal with my own grief from autoimmune stuff. I actually lost all of my teeth. I wear dentures, and I have since I was 32. And when she spoke about her eye cancer and having to lose one of her eyes to it and how she realized she was grieving that loss, I was like, oh my God, that's what all that was. I was grieving a part of me that I didn't think I would lose at 32, let alone maybe ever. And we have to give ourselves space to feel those feelings, but sharing your story, and this is what I tell everyone, you never know who needs to hear it and who you may help by saying what you've felt and what you've been through. And that ultimately is why we're podcasting. That's right. Why we're here.
That's right. That's the whole reason. What a great summary. And I am honored to be here to talk about Rebecca. I absolutely will be listening to that podcast 1,000%. I will be sharing about that podcast on my own podcast. And I think that you really have memorialized her in the best way that you can. And all that's left is to feel the grief.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes we're busy in that part. Yeah. I know, like with my dad, those first 2 weeks, it's like every day is 10 things and we got to do this and the funeral and this and call all the people. And then you kind of come out of that and you're like, oh, okay, he's gone and life is different. And, I have friends right now who are going through very difficult divorces, which is its own grief. And it's like, just put your foot in front of the other every day. And at some point it'll be gone and you'll process it, right? We can I think we have to give ourselves space and grace. And we're not great at that.
Grace, honey.
We're not great at that. And the world tells us, nope, you don't get either of those. Just keep going. So I am so grateful, Melissa, for you to have been here to have this conversation, for us to get to know each other better, and also to memorialize Rebecca and anyone listening who's lost someone, help them through this process. And I hope it does. And I appreciate you so much. Everyone, go listen to your Bish Therapist podcast. You're going to love it. Even if you don't like reality TV, she has great episodes talking about mental health and different issues that are amazing educational pieces. I encourage everyone to listen. Thank you again, Melissa, for being here, sharing your story, and helping us talk about the hard things.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you. This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was a great interview. I love when I get to re-listen to my interviews when I'm editing, and I really hope that you enjoyed it too. I loved hearing more about Melissa's story, her journey with cancer and her battle over the years and living with a non-curable cancer now. I really, really appreciate her perspective and information about those of us wanting to support our friends and family going through cancer or other illnesses. I really appreciate how open and honest she is about that. And I know it helped me, and I hope it helped you too. I also hope that you were inspired to realize, just as Melissa did, you can start a podcast about anything. You can lean on skills you have, work you do, or it can be about something fun that you just enjoy talking about. I've thought about starting a podcast about Bravo shows for years, and maybe someday I'll do it. But I really loved getting to know Melissa more and hearing her perspective on podcasting and being a woman and being in the mental health space. And I cannot wait to share more new amazing interviews and content with you here soon. If you haven't done so already, head on over to my YouTube channel and subscribe so that you will get notified every time a new episode comes out, as well as check out some of my shorts of upcoming content and events that you could be a part of, including my Women's Podcaster Party networking community. Thank you so much for listening. Much love to you.